I was sitting in that courtroom trying to breathe without making noise. Brandon's lawyer stood tall in her heels, holding a spreadsheet like it was a weapon. She can't provide stable housing. Her children wear secondhand shoes. Her apartment is temporary with unpaid utility warnings. She smiled when she said it, like poverty was a punchline. And the judge, he didn't even flinch. He just nodded, slow, like he was agreeing. I felt my hands go cold. My palms were sweating, but my fingers were frozen. All I could think was, I'm losing them, my babies. Because I'm poor. I didn't cry. I wanted to, my throat was already tight, my eyes stinging, but I didn't let the tears come. I wouldn't give them that. Not Brandon, not his lawyer, not the judge who couldn't even look me in the eye. Beside me, Arya was drawing on a piece of paper with a dull crayon we'd found in the bottom of my purse. Luca sat rigid, eyes narrowed, watching his father. Brandon didn't glance our way once. Then, just as the silence was about to collapse on top of me, Luca leaned in. "Mom," he whispered. "Can I show the judge the letter I found in Dad's safe?" I turned and stared at him. "What letter?" He reached into the pocket of his jacket, that old one, with the frayed cuffs I couldn't replace yet, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I didn't know what it was. I didn't ask. I just nodded. My voice was gone. And he stood up, my sweet, small, quiet boy, and walked toward the judge like the room wasn't full of people trying to erase us. But I should back up. Because this story didn't start in a courtroom. It started the day Brandon told me I didn't need to work anymore. We were sitting in our old kitchen, the one with the crooked drawer, and the light that flickered if you opened the fridge too fast. I'd just come home from my part-time office job, tired, but smiling, because I'd brought home donuts for breakfast the next day. He kissed me, took the bag, and said, "You don't need to keep doing this. Doing what I asked. Working," he said. "We're okay financially. You've done enough. You deserve to rest." At first I felt seen, cared for, like maybe I was being protected. It took me a long time to realize I was being cornered, because slowly, almost gently, everything I used to do for myself disappeared. I didn't go back to work. I didn't keep my own bank account. I didn't even realize the credit card was only in his name until it was too late. But back then I still believed him. He was so convincing. "Let me take care of the hard stuff," he'd say. "You just focus on being the best mom in the world." So I did. I poured everything into Luca and Arya. I went to mommy and me groups and packed homemade lunches and made up bedtime stories that ended with their names in the stars. I didn't notice when my voice started shrinking, when the world narrowed to one grocery list, one baby monitor, one man's mood, until one day he wasn't home for dinner. Then it was 2 days, then a week, and then a legal envelope arrived addressed to Emily Carter. Inside, a petition for full custody. He said I was unstable, that I wasn't providing a safe environment, that I was unfit. I sat on the floor of the kitchen and reread the papers 10 times. I could still smell the pancakes burning on the stove behind me. I had nothing. No lawyer, no savings. No idea how to fight someone who knew every weak spot I had because he built them. But I showed up anyway, because I had 2 kids who needed me too. After I got that envelope, I spent 2 hours sitting on the kitchen floor staring at it. I couldn't even cry at first. My whole body went stiff, like I couldn't afford to move, because if I moved, I'd shatter. Then the stove timer went off, and the sound brought me back just enough to smell the burnt pancakes. I turned the burner off, threw them in the trash, and put the envelope in the drawer. That night, I sat on the edge of my kids' beds and watched them sleep. Luca with one sock missing, and the other pulled halfway up his shin. Arya drooling onto her favorite pillow, clutching that ragged unicorn she carried everywhere. They looked safe, and I remember thinking, how do you prove that love is enough? The next morning, I called the courthouse. The woman on the phone told me politely that I needed to respond to the custody petition within 30 days or risk default. "Do you have legal counsel?" she asked. I laughed. It just came out. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. I had $30 in my checking account. My phone was prepaid. My car needed new brake pads badly. Legal counsel. I asked if there were any free services. She told me about a legal aid clinic that opened at 8 a.m., but people started lining up by 6. The next morning, I stood outside the courthouse in the cold, holding a folder with every document I could find, school records, a letter from my landlord, even crayon drawings from the kids. Proof of something. Of care. Of effort. I was the third person in line. The woman who saw me looked exhausted, like she'd spent her whole life in fluorescent lights and folding chairs. But she was kind. She said I couldn't get full representation, but they could help me respond to the filing and maybe connect me with a family advocate if one became available. Just tell the truth, she said. Put everything in writing. Show them who you are. But who was I now? That question hit me harder than I expected. Because before Brandon, I used to know. I was the girl who worked late and brought donuts for the office the next morning. I had inside jokes with coworkers and a go-to karaoke song and a dream of opening my own bookkeeping business someday. But I'd given all of it up. Not in a single moment, but over hundreds of small, quiet compromises. Until one day, I woke up and couldn't recognize the person staring back at me in the mirror. Brandon wasn't violent. That's the thing people don't always understand. He didn't yell. He didn't hit. He just made me feel smaller, like I owed him for the roof over my head, like I had to justify every decision, every dollar, every breath. When Arya was born, it got worse. He was tired. I was too sensitive. He rolled his eyes when I cried. He called me dramatic when I said I felt invisible. I remember once Arya had a diaper rash that just wouldn't go away. I tried 4 different creams. One night I told him I was worried and maybe we should see a doctor. He looked at me and said, "We don't need to waste money over your anxiety." And I remember feeling ashamed, like I had failed already just by caring too much. That's how it was. Not loud, not violent. Just quiet removal of oxygen, one sentence at a time. After he left, I scrambled. The joint account was emptied. The rent was due in 2 weeks. I didn't even have a credit card in my name. I took cleaning jobs under the table, scrubbing office floors at night, and bathrooms on weekends. I washed the kids' clothes in the bathtub when the laundry card ran out. I boiled water on the stove and poured it into buckets so they wouldn't have to bathe in cold water. And through all of it, I tried to keep their world as soft and bright as I could. We had no internet, but I read them books from the library. No cable, but we made up stories at bedtime. No toys that blinked or buzzed, but Arya built castles out of cardboard boxes, and Luca made up board games with buttons and dice. I was doing everything I could, but that courtroom didn't care about effort. It cared about numbers, bank statements, stability. The first time I saw Brandon in court, I almost didn't recognize him. He looked polished, pressed, confident. He had a new haircut, a tailored suit, and a lawyer with a $600 an hour smirk. He didn't even look at me. When the hearing started, his lawyer Carla stood up and introduced herself like she was starting a TED Talk. She had color-coded tabs and glossy exhibits. Photos of Brandon's home, his fridge, his car. She said words like primary residence and inconsistent financial environment. Then she turned to me, not directly, not with eye contact, but with precision. She said Ms. Carter has no verifiable income, no savings, and no reliable transportation. Her children have no access to private education, consistent nutrition, or long-term medical plans. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and ask, "Where were you when I was skipping dinner, so there was enough cereal left for the kids? Where were you when I sold my wedding ring to buy them coats last winter?" But I stayed seated, because I knew how it would look. I'd read the online forums. I'd heard the horror stories. Women called emotional or unstable for showing any kind of fight in court. So I sat still, burning, humiliated. Luca squeezed my hand that day. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me like he was watching everything and filing it away in his little head. Like he knew, even if he didn't know how. That was the worst part. Not being attacked, but being unable to defend myself without making things worse. The judge didn't ask me a single question. He glanced at my documents and said we'd reconvene in 2 weeks. Outside the courtroom, Brandon walked past me like I was a stranger. I should have felt anger. But what I felt was colder. Irrelevance. Those next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I called every agency I could, waited on hold, filled out forms, begged for help. I collected letters from the kids' teachers, glowing ones. A note from my landlord saying I was never late. Even a copy of the receipt where I sold my wedding ring. It still didn't feel like enough. I walked the kids to school every morning, then took the bus across town to clean offices. Sometimes I'd sit in the bathroom stall just to breathe for 5 minutes before heading to my second job. I stopped looking at myself in the mirror. I stopped returning my mom's calls. I didn't want the "I told you so." I stopped talking to friends who used to invite me out. There was nothing left of me to offer. But every night I checked on Luca and Arya. I tucked them in, kissed their cheeks, and whispered, "We're okay." Even when we weren't. Especially when we weren't. Because the one thing I still had, the one thing Brandon couldn't take, was presence. I was there when Arya had nightmares, when Luca scraped his knee, when the light bulb in their room flickered and scared them. I was the one who changed it. That's what parenting is. Not private schools and performance spreadsheets, but showing up, every time. I just didn't know if the court would see it that way. Then came the day of the second hearing. I put on the same dress, the same blazer. I packed the kids' snacks in Ziplocs, and we took the early bus. As we walked up the courthouse steps, Luca held my hand tightly and asked, "Is it going to be okay?" I smiled, but it was brittle. "Yeah, baby, it's going to be okay." I didn't know if I was lying. What I did know was this: Brandon had the money. But I had the truth. I just hoped that someone in that courtroom would care. The second hearing started colder than the first. Not in temperature and tone. The judge walked in with a file already open. He barely looked up as we were told to rise, then sit. It felt like a decision had already been made before I opened my mouth. Brandon sat 2 rows ahead with his lawyer, Carla Dean, who looked more polished than ever. Her lipstick matched her binder tabs. Her pen clicked like a countdown. I sat straight, chin up, hands clasped in my lap so they wouldn't shake. I'd barely slept the night before. I'd ironed my borrowed blazer 3 times. Arya's hair was braided. Luca wore the only pair of shoes without holes in the soles. None of it mattered. Not here. Not in this room. Carla stood again. "Your Honor," she said, "we submit the following updated documentation of Mr. Carter's household income, property, and dependability as a sole caregiver." She gestured toward a stack of documents, already marked and filed. "Ms. Carter," she said with a nod in my direction, "but not my eyes, has provided no evidence of full-time employment, no tax documentation, and has admitted to working unreported cash-based jobs." She paused for effect. "Her children deserve a stable, nourishing, safe environment, something they are currently lacking under her care." I clenched my jaw. I didn't blink. But the words burned like acid behind my ribs. She continued. She was late on her electricity bill in February. Her daughter's teacher reported signs of undernutrition. The family resides in temporary housing with no designated bedrooms for the children. Then came the sentence that sliced deeper than all the others. This is not neglect. This is poverty. And poverty, while not a crime, is a risk. There it was, laid bare like a diagnosis. A risk. That's what I had become. Not a mother, not a protector, just a risk on someone else's spreadsheet. The judge didn't look at me. He leaned back, tapped his pen. I could feel it, the shift, the unspoken judgment thick in the air. It didn't matter that I loved them more than my own life. It didn't matter that I hadn't missed a rent payment, that I worked nights, that I ate less so they could have more. On paper, I was losing. Luca tugged on my sleeve. I didn't react right away. I was too focused on breathing, on staying upright. But he tugged again, and I turned. He looked up at me. His face serious. "Mom," he whispered, "can I show the judge the letter I found?" It didn't register. What letter? He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Soft and worn at the edges, he'd been carrying it for a while. I didn't know what it was. I didn't ask. I just nodded. My voice was gone. He stood up. He was so small. Just a second grader. But he walked down that aisle like he'd done it before. Past Brandon. Past Carla. He held the letter in both hands. "Excuse me, Your Honor," he said. The courtroom froze. The judge blinked. "Yes. I found this in my dad's safe. Can I show you?" Carla straightened like she'd been jolted. Brandon turned slowly, then fast. His eyes locked on the paper in Luca's hand, and I saw it. Panic. "Bring it here," the judge said. Luca stepped forward. Quiet. Calm. He handed it over. The judge unfolded it, read the top, then read further. His brow furrowed. His eyes darted back to Brandon. "Mr. Carter," he said slowly, "would you like to explain this?" Silence. Then Brandon stood up too fast. "That letter it's old. It wasn't—" "Sit down, Mr. Carter," the judge snapped. And for the first time, I saw Brandon hesitate. Carla leaned in toward him, whispering urgently. But her face had gone pale. The judge read aloud, "To Brandon Carter from L. Becker CPA. Subject strategic financial shielding, divorce prep." Then he paused, looked at me, then backed down. "This memo outlines steps to restructure your financial profile prior to divorce proceedings. It includes asset transfers to shell entities' offshore accounts and methods to reduce apparent income and liabilities in order to appear more favorable in family court." He read one more line: "Ensure primary custody if possible. At minimum, minimize legal appeal risk by appearing financially stable and morally sound." I didn't move. I couldn't. It was one thing to suspect. It was another to hear it out loud in front of everyone, in front of my children. I felt something in my chest collapse, not in defeat this time, but in release. Like someone had finally said what I'd been trying to explain, with every tear I'd swallowed in silence. The judge looked up. His expression changed slowly. What had been skeptical and distant was now sharper. "You attempted to manipulate this court," he said. "You've engaged in deception with the intent to control the outcome of this case." Carla looked like she wanted to disappear. The judge turned to me. "Ms. Carter, were you aware of this document?" "No, Your Honor," I said. My voice was hoarse. "This is the first time I've seen or heard of it." "Your son found it." I nodded. "He never told me." Luca piped up. "I didn't want to get in trouble, but I didn't want to lose either." The judge looked at him for a long time. Then something softened. "You did the right thing, young man," he said. He turned back to the room. "I'm pausing these proceedings for a formal inquiry into Mr. Carter's financial conduct. In the meantime, custody remains with Ms. Carter. Mr. Carter's parenting time is suspended pending investigation." I heard those words, but my body didn't react. It was like my brain was buffering. When it finally landed, I sat down hard. Arya crawled into my lap. Luca leaned against my side, and I wrapped my arms around both of them like I was trying to hold the whole world in place. Brandon said nothing. Carla didn't argue. The judge left the bench. The bailiff dismissed the room, but I didn't move. I couldn't, not yet, because something had just happened, something irreversible. Not just legally, emotionally. Brandon's mask had cracked, and for the first time, the court saw what I'd lived with for years. Not just a man with money, but a man with a plan to erase me. Outside the wind was sharp. Luca zipped up Arya's coat before I even asked. I watched them both and felt something bloom in my chest, not relief exactly, but a crack of light. A beginning. "How did you even find that letter?" I asked him. He shrugged. "I was looking for my tablet. It was in the safe. I kept it because it felt sneaky." "You were so brave," I said. "You didn't mess up. You saved us." He nodded once. "That's all?" He didn't smile. He didn't need to. He knew. The next few days passed in a haze of paperwork emails and deep exhales. The court had ordered a financial investigation. Brandon's parenting time was suspended. And I wasn't afraid for the first time in months. Not because things were easy, they weren't, but because for once I wasn't the one on trial. The court-appointed investigator was a woman named Ms. Trent. She had a tight ponytail, tired eyes, and a voice that never rushed. When she came to our apartment, I was terrified. I'd scrubbed the floors twice, made a lasagna I couldn't afford, lit a candle to hide the musty radiator smell. But she didn't care about any of that. She sat on my couch, took out a notebook, and asked, "Can you walk me through what life's been like for you and your children since the separation?" I told her. I didn't perform. I didn't sugarcoat it. I just told her. About the bathtub laundry. About the meals that weren't enough for 3. About the silence that settled in when the lights went out early to save power. She nodded and wrote everything down without interrupting me once. And then she said something that cracked me open. "Thank you for being honest. You've done more than most would in your situation." The investigation moved fast. Faster than I expected. Because Brandon had messed up. There were accounts in shell company names, offshore wires that didn't match tax filings, a storage unit rented under a business alias full of high-end electronics and luxury purchases he never disclosed. Ms. Trent called me one evening and said, "There is clear, deliberate concealment of assets here. You were right to be concerned." I hung up the phone and just stood in the hallway. Not crying, not smiling, just breathing, like my lungs finally remembered how to work. That week, I applied for 5 jobs. Most didn't call back. but one did an office cleaning company looking for someone to work nights at a downtown medical complex. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, and it came with something I hadn't had in a long time, a routine. I got home at 1 a.m. most nights, woke up at 6:30, walked the kids to school, then studied while sitting on the floor next to the laundry because I didn't have a desk. I'd always been good with numbers before I stopped believing I could do anything with them. But now I enrolled in an online bookkeeping certification program. It was slow. Some nights I couldn't keep my eyes open long enough to finish a module, but I kept going, because even if my body was tired, something in my spirit had started waking up again. The kids noticed the difference too. Arya started sleeping through the night again. Her preschool teacher told me she was talking more, participating in story time. Luca joined his school's art club. He came home one day with a drawing of a tree, thick roots, wide branches. Underneath it, he'd written one word in capital letters, growing. That's what we were doing now. We weren't rich. We weren't even stable by most standards. But we were growing. Every meal I could pay for without panic. Every bus ride I could make without checking my balance. Every bedtime I wasn't distracted by fear, it added up. Not fast, not loud, but real. One afternoon, I found a second-hand laptop for $80. I messaged the seller so fast, my fingers fumbled the text. When I picked it up, I told him I needed it for school. He gave me an extra charger and said, "Good luck." That man has no idea what he gave me, because that laptop sat at the center of everything that changed next. I used it to finish the certification, to apply for jobs, to file forms, to email teachers and set up online banking, and eventually to rebuild my credit. That junky old laptop became my way back to myself. I also started therapy. I almost didn't. The idea of talking out loud about Brandon, about all the things I let slide, all the things I still blamed myself for, felt shameful. But I needed to say it somewhere. I needed to say that he didn't scream at me, but he erased me. That he told me I was safe while slowly making sure I had nowhere else to go. That he praised me when I was quiet and punished me when I wasn't. The counselor, her name was Patrice, said something that stuck. Surviving isn't weakness, it's skill. You stayed afloat in a flood. That's not shameful, that's heroic. I cried in that session. Hard. And when I came home, I looked in the mirror, and for the first time in years, saw someone I liked again. The final hearing date arrived before I was ready. I wasn't scared this time, but I was bracing myself. You don't go through something like this without preparing for disappointment. For someone to say, "Sorry, we misread the evidence," or "He's cleaned it up now, so let's move on." But when I walked into the courtroom this time with legal representation from a domestic support advocacy group, I felt different, taller, heavier in the way strength feels. Like I wasn't made of paper anymore. Brandon looked smaller. His new lawyer barely made eye contact with him. There were no smiles, no smugness, just clipped responses and a stack of financial documents with red flags all over them. The judge entered, sat down, and started speaking without pleasantries. This court has reviewed the financial findings from the inquiry into Mr. Carter's conduct. We find substantial evidence of willful asset concealment, income manipulation, and premeditated deception. He paused, looked at Brandon, then looked at me. Ms. Carter, in light of this, and your demonstrated effort, honesty, and continued commitment to your children's well-being under difficult circumstances, this court grants you full physical and legal custody of your children. My mouth went dry. He kept going. Mr. Carter will be ordered to pay backdated child support, and his visitation will remain monitored pending further review. The gavel fell, and for the first time, it sounded like peace. Luca squeezed my hand. Arya squealed quietly and hugged my waist. I didn't cry. Not right away, because part of me still couldn't believe it. But when we got home, I put on music in the kitchen. We had pancakes for dinner. Arya danced with syrup on her cheek. Luca drew on a notepad by the sink, and then he showed me what he'd written. A drawing of a house, 3 stick figures holding hands, and above it, "Home is where Mom is." It's been 6 months since the ruling. Brandon hasn't seen the kids since his 3rd supervised visit. He didn't cancel, he just stopped showing up. I didn't chase him, didn't call, didn't explain it to the kids in a way that tried to make him look better than he was. I just said, "He's not ready to show up the way you deserve," and left it at that. They stopped asking about him after a while. There was no dramatic exit, no scene, just absence. And honestly, that silence felt like closure. Life didn't suddenly become easy. I still work long hours. I still say no to things other families might take for granted: school trips, new shoes, cable. But the fear, that constant pressure in my chest, the voice that said, he could take them from you just like that, it's gone. Now I sleep. Real sleep, the kind that comes when you're not scanning for threats, when your dreams don't feel like warnings. Now I laugh without checking if someone's watching. Now I stand at the bus stop with Arya and Luca, and I don't wonder what the other parents think. I just hold their hands and breathe the air. Luca still talks about the letter sometimes. One evening, we were sitting on the couch, watching a movie with the volume too low, because the neighbors had a baby, and I didn't want to disturb them. He looked up at me and said, "Was I in trouble for taking it?" I paused the movie, looked him right in the eye. "No, baby," I said. "You were brave. You told the truth when it mattered most." He nodded like he understood, then leaned his head on my shoulder. We didn't say anything else after that. We didn't need to. Because that's the thing about kids. They feel everything, even what you try to hide. He carried that letter for weeks. He carried the weight of what it meant. He waited for the right moment, and when no adult in the room had the courage to speak, he did. Sometimes I still think about that courtroom. Not because I miss it, God, no. But because I need to remember what I walked through. I need to remember how I sat in silence while strangers debated whether I deserved to be a mother. How I swallowed my voice because I was taught that poor women who cry in court look unstable. How I clenched my hands under the table trying not to shake. And how my son, my 7-year-old, stood up and saved us. Not with anger, not with noise, just with truth. I printed out the court order, the one that granted me full custody. I keep it in a folder tucked between birth certificates and school forms. I don't look at it often, but on hard days I do. And every time I read it, I remember Patrice, my counselor, saying, "Your worth was never up for debate. It was just buried under someone else's story." A few weeks ago, I got an email from a local bookkeeping firm. They'd seen my resume, wanted to schedule an interview. It was a Thursday. Rainy. I wore the same blazer I wore to court, only now it didn't feel borrowed. It felt earned. The office manager was warm. She looked me in the eye, asked thoughtful questions, didn't flinch when I mentioned the gap in my work history or the fact that I'd been raising 2 kids alone. A few days later, they offered me the job. Part-time to start with benefits. Flexible hours. A real desk. I took it. We're still in the same apartment, but it feels different now. It's ours. Every scuffed wall and thrifted curtain. Every chipped bowl and wobbly table leg. It's home. We painted the living room light yellow, Arya's choice. Luca made paper stars and taped them to the ceiling above his bed. There's always music playing in the background, even if it's just from my old phone speaker. Some nights we dance in the kitchen again. Other nights we just sit. Together, quiet, whole. The last time Brandon tried to make contact, it was through his lawyer. He wanted to renegotiate support payments. Said the burden was unfair. I didn't respond. My attorney did. The court denied the motion. That was the last we heard from him. I don't think about revenge anymore. Not the way I used to. I used to fantasize about standing in court with proof receipts, documents, a perfect speech. I wanted to burn him down with logic, with justice. But when it finally happened, when the judge read that letter out loud, and Brandon couldn't speak, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still, like something had clicked back into place. Like the version of me he tried to erase had finally returned. Not louder, not meaner, just whole. I look at myself in the mirror now, and I see someone I recognize. Not the girl I used to be, she's long gone, but the woman who rose up from where she'd been buried. She's quieter, stronger. She doesn't ask permission to exist. This story started in a courtroom, with people looking at me like I was just a number, a liability, a sad statistic in a borrowed dress. It started with a question no mother should ever have to answer. Why should she get the children if she can't afford to raise them? But it ended with a little boy holding up a letter, with the truth folded, crumpled, carried in a coat pocket being read aloud, and with a judge finally seeing what love looks like when it has nothing left to give but presence. Now I wake up every morning knowing 2 things. 1, I fought for my kids with everything I had. And 2, they saw it. They remember it. And if there's anything I want them to carry forward, it's this. That love isn't measured by bank accounts. That truth matters even when no one wants to hear it. That bravery can live in small bodies. And that strength doesn't always look like winning. Sometimes it looks like staying. I didn't win because I had power or money or connections. I won because I showed up, because I refused to disappear, because in the end, my son stood up with a letter in his hand and gave us back our story. They said I didn't have enough to offer, not enough money, not enough stability, not enough proof I was fit to be a mother. But I was there. Every night, every scraped knee, every bedtime story whispered through exhaustion. And in the end, that mattered more than any spreadsheet. My son didn't save us because he was told to. He did it because he knew what truth looked like. We didn't win with power. We won with presence. Sometimes the smallest voice in the room is the one that rewrites everything.